Episode of Pro Democracy Pod. This is your host, Alex Rubenstein, with Mila Garayeb. We're here today with Andre Domise, and we're going to spend the next 3.5 hours talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's dress and her crying on the House floor today. So welcome to the show. I'm actually kidding, guys. We're going to be talking about Canada's recent elections. I'm not an expert in Canadian politics, and the extent of my knowledge on this topic is that the blackface guy is still prime minister and the Nazi girl is still the finance minister. So, Mila, if you could start us off with some actual knowledge on this topic, that would be lovely.
I mean, yeah, that sums it up. No, I think that I assume you're referring to Chrystia Freeland. I think she is more in charge than Trudeau is. There's something that's like not all there about him. And like, I think a lot of our election coverage was devoted to people trying to portray him as like this evil guy who pretends to be virtuous when he's really not. I don't know if like he even has the mental capacity to like think like that.
Yeah, he's not a Machiavellian genius.
I really
basically
like.
He's a worn down himbo at this point who's just like way beyond his capacity. So he's a washed king is what he is.
Those are some sharp words for the descendant of Fidel Castro.
Well, I mean, but he didn't listen to his daddy, so and not only has he betrayed the revolution, but so did his cucked pretend father. I don't know if you knew that Pierre Elliott Trudeau used to be a Marxist back in the day. Like he was himself he was a socialist, and he abandoned all of those principles. And this is what happened to you.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, I think I don't think that's an uncommon phenomenon, but it's funny because like, we kind of like when you study like Middle East politics, you always talk about like dynasties and whatever, and then like we end up having basically the same thing here. Like there's no way, I don't think Justin Trudeau would even have been elected if he didn't have the name recognition, because he's actually quite unremarkable. I actually met him not many years, I think a year before he ran to be the leader of the Liberal Party, and everyone was excited because they thought he was hot, and like I was in high school still, right? And people just asked him if he was going to run, and he was like, no, I'm not going to run. Like, I think my daughter
Who was the leader at the time when this happened? Was it Ignatieff or was it
Yeah, this was right after they lost like really big.
Okay. Yeah, that was Ignatieff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, I'm never gonna run, like it's gonna be my daughter next or whatever. And then a year later he announces he's gonna run. So something must have happened. I don't know what. But something makes me doubt that he's really in charge. I think Freeland is probably more powerful than he is, which is very disturbing. I find her to be a very, very disturbing character. But
yeah, she's definitely, she's got big Deborah Lash energy. She's like Dana Lash energy. She's definitely one of the more scary figures in that cabinet. I used to think like probably the worst person in Trudeau's cabinet was Bill Morneau. But I really should have seen Morneau's downfall coming, and I can't prove this, but I am almost positive that Chrystia Freeland was responsible for that downfall. And I don't know if you knew this, Alex, but Trudeau, when he ran for leader of the Liberal Party, he ended up running against his dad's side piece. Did you know that?
No, I didn't. Actually, what I was going to say is like a lot of my role in today's conversation is going to be saying, wait a minute, can you explain that for our viewers? And what I mean by that is, wait a minute, can you explain that for me? Because like I said, I know nothing about Canadian politics. So, I mean, Mila, if you would just like give like a quick introduction on who Chrystia Freeland is, why she's such a controversial figure, and like, I mean, I guess they call her, like, I know this is one thing I do know. I know they call her the minister of everything, right? She's finance
Yeah.
minister, but that's like her nickname. So if you could just give a quick background on that, and I guess both of you, I'd like to hear from you, like what in your perspective, how will the results of this election kind of like change Canadian politics, if they will change at all? What is the state of Canadian politics? I mean, because like in the US, we just get like no information about this. So I just want to have this in the back of our heads during this conversation, like that, like our viewers probably know, probably more than me, but which is still not like a lot about Canadian politics. So go ahead.
I don't think a lot changed. I mean, even if you look at the seat allocation, it's, if anything, I just thought this election was really pointless. I personally didn't vote. I like just felt no reason to. I didn't really feel like anything was gonna change.
You didn't write in Jill Stein. I'm sorry.
No. Well, I just figured it wasn't worth that. Like, it wasn't worth, waiting in line in the polls and like missing a school and work day, or like, interrupting my school and work day to do it. And so I actually really don't think anything has changed. I think some people might be more angry at Trudeau for making everyone go through this election again and go through this only to get the exact same result. I think the People's Party might have I thought they were getting more support, but they didn't win any seats. So
this is like a more left-leaning party.
No.
Okay,
no.
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Like every time you drop a name, a party, like anything really.
The People's, imagine like the January 6th stormers, right? Imagine the what was that dude's name? The Viking from the stormers.
Yeah.
Over.
Yeah, like
so they're Canada's Taliban.
Yeah, well, they're a bit.
They're Canada's Taliban.
No,
I wouldn't say that, but but imagine like the Viking trumper who was standing at the podium, with his bare chest. Imagine that like you had a political party led by him, and that's essentially what the People's Party
but Quebecois, but like with a Quebecois accent, yeah, which makes it even funnier. I hate to say it,
I know,
but like
there's something about Quebec racism that is like you almost have to respect it. It's like it's like this aggrieved but like purified form of racism that I actually enjoy a little bit. I can't even lie. Like the racism be funny sometimes.
I mean, I lived there for 5.5 years and it's definitely different. I think they kind of try to do the Europe thing where like, they have issues with like Muslim and Jewish people in Quebec, but they kind of try to be like, we're very secular. Like, I think they're trying very hard to be like France, but they're not as sophisticated.
They try to do the laïcité thing, like the secularism, but they make a huge exception for Catholicism.
Yeah.
So it's like, but this is not religious. It's part of our culture, and it's like you've got a big fucking cross at the head of your legislative assembly. It's still religious, but I mean, to them, it just doesn't count. So they can never actually get like the French culture exactly correct. There's always something a little bit off. Imagine that, like, I don't know. Imagine Texans trying to put on British affectations, and you've basically got Quebec.
Yeah.
So how did they do in the elections? Because I totally interrupted there just to,
Oh,
they didn't get any
no seats and about 5% of the total vote.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, it's still practically like tripling what their results were last time around, which was I think around 1.6%. So they have gained some momentum, but I think there's an outsized amount of attention paid to them because it benefits. I mean, it really benefits the Liberal Party. Like the more attention that gets paid to them, and the more Liberal politicians can posture in front of cameras and talk about, well, there's no place for this in Canada, and this is not the Canada I recognize, and so on and so on. Then it just makes them look good by comparison. So I like the Liberals need them. They're like the contrapositive.
Yeah, they really do. And I think, it also takes away, like, if they have this kind of cartoonish racism with it's like the funny Quebecois guy complaining about family reunification, it kind of conceals the racism of, or like the racist impacts of the policies of the Liberal Party, which is like, not only anti-Indigenous, but also like imperialist. It's Freeland is like really trying to follow the US in like the small differences that we like, and close the small differences that we have. Like, there's been a lot of pressure on the government to be more hostile to Cuba, and be like the US with Cuba. I mean, Freeland also is very involved in the Guaido Venezuela ordeal, stuff like that. And so and involved with Ukraine, as that one is a bit more well known.
She literally goes to like a Ukraine festival that happens in like just outside of downtown Toronto. She'll go there on a year-to-year basis, and she will say Slava Ukraini. She'll tweet it, and nobody will say shit. Like no one will say anything about it.
And just for our viewers who might not know, that's the slogan that's used by basically neo-Nazis in Ukraine that played a big role in overthrowing the government in the U.S.-backed coup. I think that was like 2011 or 2014, something like that. Early 2010s.
The color revolution,
yeah. So, guys, folks, I am going to be ending the Periscope. We're going to be moving over to Rockfin exclusively. We're going to keep talking about Canadian politics. As you can see, there's like a lot of parallels between Canadian and U.S. politics. And also, if Andre has time, I'd like to talk to him about some of the writing that he's been doing regarding the lockdowns, the coronavirus lockdowns in Canada. So I hope that you join us on Rockfin to hear that conversation. Amelia, you can take over again.
Yeah, I mean, well, like, so Andre had a recent article on the vaccine mandates, and that was another thing, which is why I think the PPC, the People's Party, became more popular, is because I know people who voted for them just because they were the only party to oppose these vaccine mandates. There was not any, I think, Andre's critique was the only mainstream critique, not mainstream, but like the only public in a Canadian publication critique that I saw coming from like not the far right, like it's so I think, there was no alternative offered from all the other mainstream parties. And so a lot of people went to the People's Party just for that reason, which again also benefited the Liberals because it split the Conservative vote. Like I know a lot of people who used to vote Conservative, and now they're like, no, I'm going to the PPC because the Conservatives support these vaccines.
There are actually even like Greens and NDP people that were going over to the PPC for the same reason. And not just for the mandate, but also because of the vaccine passports. So there's now a vaccine passport in effect in British Columbia, in Manitoba, in Ontario, and Quebec. And and now they're introducing one in Alberta. And the problem is it's a restriction on freedom of movement. It ends up affecting the most marginalized people first and foremost. A friend of mine out in British Columbia is a disability advocate and is medically ineligible to get the vaccine. But because there are no exceptions to having to produce a vaccine passport to go to public places that are not essentially, if it's anything outside of like the pharmacy or the grocery store, she can't go there, and there's no exception for her. So even though she's medically ineligible, she literally cannot get the vaccine. She can't go anywhere for as long as this passport mandate's in effect.
Yeah, and the way that a lot of people have to show it, like I've had to show it now a few times, is through a on your, like you can show it on your phone. It's a code. It looks like this for people who don't know. But it's also been impacting homeless people because like they can't log on and download, like they don't have a phone to carry. Not like a lot of them don't have the resources to do that. So it's been like a big issue here not just, and there's been a framing of it like, oh, only the right cares about this, but it's not true. It's been an
No,
issue.
what really pissed me off is how quickly people on the left abandon their principles the moment that it
Yeah.
becomes politically expedient. So when it like take for example like China's approach to vaccination, right? Like they don't have this massive anti-vax movement the way that we do here, because what they've done in addition to developing their own vaccine, they also, for example, offered low to no interest loans for small businesses to help keep them afloat during the lockdown period. They were making payments to landlords so that their tenants could stay housed. They built pop-up hospitals, and for people that were affected by COVID, like if they were infected and needed medical assistance, they would be able to stay in these facilities, have access to 24/7 care. There was a massive restructuring of like the system of social relations that they had in order to get everyone through COVID as quickly as possible. And this was on top of the lockdowns and so on. But people talked about their they talked about the contact tracing app being authoritarian and close to a police state, because I guess the New York Times had found that this app that people had to download to their WeChat, which is basically like the Chinese version of like of WhatsApp, but people would have to download this app to their WeChat to do contact tracing. And I guess the New York Times had found a piece of code that was connecting the WeChat app to the police. So they raised all kinds of alarms about that. However, China doesn't have a vaccine mandate. There are some regions where municipalities have tried to create and enforce a vaccine mandate, and the central government came down on them immediately and said, that's not the approach that we're going to take. They also don't have vaccine passports. So we've actually taken more authoritarian measures with regards to restricting people's freedom of movement than even China has. And you'll see people that are like center left and on the left saying, well, the only people that have a problem with this are the far right wingers. And when I will say, like, there are people that I know for a fact haven't been able to get the vaccine because they're working multiple jobs, because there isn't a location close by where they can get vaccinated, because they're not able to book an appointment online. Some of them are undocumented and have to produce a health card or put in a health card number in order to make that booking online. And if they can't do that, they have to call into a clinic during the open hours, and the hours that these clinics are open are at the same times that they're working. So there's multiple people that are falling through the cracks that I know personally. And to that extent, 25% of Canadians are falling through those cracks or have refused to get the vaccine. But the people who don't want to get vaccinated make up 8% of the Canadian population. So out of the quarter of Canadians that haven't gotten a single dose yet, we're going to let 8% of the entire population dictate the discourse for the remaining 92%. Like, that's just bullshit to me. So anybody who claims to be a liberal or claims to be on the left has completely abandoned their position in I don't know, like in service of feeding this anti-vaxxer hysteria and making it seem as though they're taking an upright moral position by opposing the PPC. And since the PPC is against mandates and against vaccine passports, well, then we have to be for mandates and for vaccine passports. It's like it's this Manichaean approach to any subject whatsoever, even if it's not supposed to take on a political dimension, which I don't believe vaccinations and mandates and passports should have ever taken on a political dimension. But now that it's there, everyone's aligning either for it or against it based on party affiliation and not any sort of deeply held principles.
Yeah. And it's
go ahead, Mila.
Oh, well, it's every party. Like it's just the PPC that, were the ones to take this stand or whatever you want to call it. And I really do think that the media and the Liberal Party, like Andre was saying, wants to elevate them because they want to portray this as like some kookiness in the same way they want to portray Canadian racism. Like, I got a mailer from the PPC right before the election from the PPC candidate in my area. And she was comparing these vaccine mandates to Canadian residential schools. Now, these mandates, there's much to be critical of, but, they're not taking children away from their families and putting them in, these abusive
overcrowded
school.
facilities and letting exactly, yeah.
And
Yeah, letting
so I
letting the
was
children
like,
be like whipped and beaten and have tuberculosis rip through the facility and kill a significant portion of them. It's nothing like that at all. But
yeah, and I'm like, well, I read the mailer, and I'm like, you guys are handing this election to the liberals on a silver platter because you're making, and you're giving these like hysterical, like pro-vaccine mandate people like more ammo because now they can say, look, all of our opponents are crazy. They think that this is the same as like residential schools, which
they
most,
don't care about that though. The
yeah.
thing is, like, they don't actually have any deeply held, like, they don't have any principles really. Their entire goal, like, I see the PPC as controlled opposition, and they have to, like, Maxime Bernier is not a stupid guy. Like, he knows what he's doing, and
And that's like
you know
the leader. I'm sorry, just you
Yeah,
name
yeah,
drop,
yeah.
so we have
yeah.
to.
So the leader
And
of
he
the
used to
People's
be,
Party.
yeah, so he ran for the Conservatives, like as a just to freshen everyone's memory or whatever. He ran for the Conservatives and he lost. He came in second. It was a close second. He was beaten by Andrew Scheer, which honestly, that's pretty humiliating. So I kind of get why, like maybe that was his Joker origin story because like
And he's been getting
a
cucked ever since.
yeah, well, a friend of mine put it like this, like, and this is a friend of mine who was actually, he's a conservative, and he said, Andrew Scheer is the human embodiment of a Dodge Caravan. And, and so, when you're beaten by Andrew Scheer, like, that sucks. So he went and started his own party. And he started off as a libertarian, but I think he kind of wants to be more Trumpish, and be more
Well,
like,
they're like libertarian when it suits them, right? Like, and it's
yeah,
the
like,
same thing with the controlled opposition. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene is like the biggest gift Democrats could ask for, right? I
yeah.
mean, so I see a lot of the same dynamics at play in the situations you guys are describing.
Yeah, totally.
So I guess, like, just to circle back a little bit, like, you guys have Justin Trudeau, correct me if I'm wrong. Justin Trudeau decided to have these snap elections on basically like a referendum of his government's COVID policies. Is that correct?
I don't know
think
what it
what
was a referendum on. I have no idea. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think he just wanted a majority.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
was no impetus behind the election. Nobody wanted it. And in the lead up to his calling the election, he didn't really give a coherent reasoning for why an election was necessary. So I don't know. I mean, anybody with like any a smidgen of cynicism or just common sense knows that it was a power grab for an electoral majority. And he didn't expect to find himself in the kind of dogfight that he did. And actually, no, I shouldn't even say that. I shouldn't say it as though it was just a power grab. I think what it was that he had, like, his government and he himself had just a litany of scandals behind them. And I think what he was trying to do was let those scandals fade far enough into people's memory that he'd be able to run an election campaign and not get completely shellacked. Right. So if this had gotten called like last March, he probably would have gotten washed. But the we fiasco. When I say we, there's this. I want to be careful because I don't want you all to get sued. And no, the brothers who run the we charity are just incredibly litigious. But probably the best way to put it is that this nonprofit organization or charity that was formerly called Me to We and is now called We. It's basically just, it started out of this save the children ish
We day.
yeah this white saviorist approach to helping people in the global south, very specifically Africa, on the African continent. And there was a shitload of money that was paid out to Trudeau, to Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, to Trudeau, etc., to Bill Morneau, Justin Trudeau's former Minister of Finance, was able to like take trips, and supposedly they were expensed to the We organization. And then on top of that, there was reports of people who were basically like calling the place a sweatshop, that they were working far beyond their agreed upon hours, that they were treated abusively, not only by like senior staff but by the founders themselves. So it was a gigantic mess. It ended up resulting in a parliamentary investigation as to whether there were ethics violations by Trudeau and his cabinet. As a result of that, Bill Morneau, as I said, the finance minister, ended up having to resign, which is how the space got opened up for Chrystia Freeland to take the position of Minister of Finance. But then on top of that, there was like the blackface fiasco that happened before the previous election. There was the SNC-Lavalin fiasco, which is where again, I don't want you all to get sued, but there was an accusation by the former attorney. So our attorney general and our minister of justice are the same person, runs both positions, which is just very strange to me, because the attorney general is not supposed to work for the government or the head of parliament. Ideally, the attorney general is functioning as an independent entity to investigate wrongdoing, no matter who it's from. So whether it's an organization or corporation that benefits people in government, or whether it's the political opposition or whatever, it's supposed to be, ideally supposed to be a nonpartisan position. But we've wrapped up the two positions into one office or one portfolio. So Jody Wilson-Raybould, who was both the Attorney General and the Minister of Justice, alleges that she was pressured to look the other way, to not investigate allegations of corruption against this engineering and mining company called SNC-Lavalin. Now, if you know anything about Canada, you know that most of our foreign influence comes from a handful of corporations that deal with natural resource extraction, primarily in the global south. So when you're investigating a company like SNC-Lavalin, you're not just investigating whether they were making handoffs and possibly bribing officials in Canada. You're talking about whether they're like paying off fucking warlords in the global south, trying to like destabilize countries and influence policy such that it helps them keep as much money as they can, while reducing the self-determination and political stability of people abroad. So in conversations that she said she had not only with Justin Trudeau but with his right hand man Gerald Butts, she gave the impression that she was pressured to not investigate this corporation. It resulted in her being demoted, moved out of her portfolio into a more junior position. She eventually ended up leaving the Liberal Party altogether and running as an independent, or sitting as an independent rather, because she didn't end up running again. And it resulted in another investigation as to whether the Trudeau government had committed any sort of ethics breaches. So with that litany of scandals in the rearview mirror, I think he was waiting for enough time to pass that people weren't going to dredge up those memories and remember how much they hated him. And I think what he thought was that since everything has calmed down, people were getting their second vaccination. Hopefully we were getting out of the woods. We would be able to return to life as normal. Hey, now's a good time to call an election. And then the Delta variant started ramping up and claiming more people and filling up the ICU beds again. And on top of that, the idea that we were going to spend $610 million, which is the most expensive election that we've ever had, to go out and vote when nobody wants to go and do that right now, it just backfired in his face.
Yeah, and he didn't get the majority. It actually, I think the results are the exact same. I was like, I kind of had wondered, would the NDP, for instance, get more seats? And of course, they never miss a chance to screw up an election.
Shoot themselves in the foot, yeah.
Yeah, and so...
And the NDP is...
They're our Social Democrat Party.
Okay.
So they're their leader played video games with AOC online
on Twitch with Hassan Piker.
Right. Oh my god!
Yeah, there you go. So that's the best way I can describe.
Oh boy, aren't you guys lucky?
To know more than that. Oh yeah.
Hey, you have how many political parties, but they're all just as useless?
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's like I have to say there are some NDP MPs that I do respect, who have like taken a big hit for taking like even mildly anti-imperialist stances. Like Nikki Ashton has been kind of dragged through the mud a little bit for just simply being like we shouldn't nuke China. Like
She didn't just get
Yeah.
dragged through the mud. I mean, she's been sabotaged on multiple occasions. Oh, okay,
yeah.
so Jagmeet Singh went to a First Nations community where Nikki Ashton was running for re-election. So
Yeah.
he went to a First Nations community where the spokespeople in that community were known to be big liberal supporters. So he goes out to talk about his commitment to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in Canada, and during this presser, the spokespeople voiced their support for the liberal candidate.
Yeah, like
She's
it was
like,
just
Yeah.
embarrassing.
yeah. So people thought, like, oh my gosh, he's got egg all over his face. The NDP guy goes out and holds a press conference with people that support liberals, and it's like, no, that's exactly what he wanted. Like, it
Mhm.
was his attempt to sandbag her. It didn't work, but and then she was also accused of anti-Semitism for doing an event with Jeremy Corbyn
Jeremy, yeah.
a
Oh my
few months
god.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So people definitely, I mean, the National Post has written a bunch of articles about her that are like kind of laughable. National Post is one of our like I want to say it's one of, but honestly, all of our publications are like the same. Like they're
Conservative in
very,
some form. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. Or at least when it comes to foreign policy, like they're all very
There's
imperialist.
just no daylight between them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like they've all endorsed like every major war that the US has gone to, like there hasn't been much deviation here. I mean, not that the US media landscape is like much better, but
Right. Yeah, but
but
I love that you guys support us going to war. I mean,
I know
it's like, well, you guys want to like, replace us or something, That's funny.
Yeah, well, there was like, a lot of the Canadian public really didn't want to go to Iraq, and we ultimately didn't. But like these media outlets were not representing the
Yeah.
view of everyone who didn't want to go, right? Like they were very much, cheerleading for the war. We have, some embarrassing Canadians like David Frum, who
Yeah.
and Michael Ignatieff, who are like pro-war liberal slash. I don't know if Frum's a liberal or conservative, but I guess it doesn't really matter.
It's like a liberal neocon.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. And his sister is a senator here.
oh, is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah. And she was like one of those people who are like, if you don't condemn China every day, it means you love genocide. And this is kind of like what our media was doing to MPs like Nikki Ashton, who, I think like is not perfect, but has, a much better foreign policy than like the majority of people that run for office. And then, I mean, we could also talk about the Green Party because that's something else. So the Green
The Green Party
Party.
of Canada. Oh, sorry. You go ahead, Mila.
No, I'm just go ahead.
So is this like more in line with the U.S. Green Party or the Iranian Green Party?
Oh, Jesus Christ! No.
Neither. I think they want to be like the US one, but
Why?
I think they're more right wing. Like
Okay.
I think like the views of like Ajamu Baraka would never make it to like
Sure.
our Green Party.
The Green Party of Canada is okay. So it's
depressed.
I don't want to. It is.
How many
depressing.
dinners
Like,
have they had with Vladimir Putin? Okay.
No, their
I
leader
don't.
is like
They're not cool enough.
Their leader is like very imperialist, but like
Yeah.
and then when you criticize her for it, she does like the whole like identity politics thing,
She like falls into this id pole crouch. So the former leader of the Green Party, Elizabeth May, who was the first Green Party member in Canada to win a parliament seat, Which I have respect for that. Like that's not easy for. I mean, the last time that usually parties that end up winning parliament seats are splittist parties that end up appealing to regional bases. So, for example, the Reform Party of Canada was created out of discontent in Western provinces with liberal policy, especially like the energy policy that ended up. Hang on about this. There was a lot of anger and that still persists to this day at Pierre Elliott Trudeau for an energy policy that essentially like forced subsidized energy for Canadians that lived outside of the prairies, so Ontario, Quebec, the Maritimes, etc. Um, and that anger coalesced into the formation of the Reform Party of Canada, which was I would say like farther right than the progressive conservatives, but it wasn't their right wing politics that sold them. It was their regional politics. It was Western Canada for Western Canada. The Bloc Québécois, which was formed in the early 1980s, that was as a result of regional Quebec politics and feeling like they don't have enough of a they don't have enough self determination in Canadian politics. So their regional issues were taking a backbench to federal political issues. So there was a split out of the Liberal Party and the Progressive Conservatives to coalesce into the Bloc Québécois. Whereas with the Green Party, there was no regional politics there whatsoever. It was entirely policy based around developing both energy and environmental policies that are sustainable, that are environmentally friendly, and so forth. So the ability for that party to emerge and win a seat in Parliament on strictly policy matters alone, I think is impressive. The problem is Elizabeth May's political views, once you examine them closely, are all over the fucking place, and so were the Green Party's platforms. There was some weird shit in there about like Wi-Fi radiation, which she still doesn't really answer questions about. May herself has not been forthright about her views on a woman's right to choose. So in Canada, there aren't like codified laws on abortion. It's really just sort of like an unspoken set of standards that we have that the medical community has created for themselves, and so we don't really have like we don't have like the cultural wedge of Roe v. Wade, for example, to rally around every election. It's pretty much agreed upon by every party that that's just something that we're not going to touch, except when you ask Elizabeth May about this. She's always basically like, it depends on when you ask her or like what phase the moon is in, what kind of answer that you're going to get.
What she had
Where it
for
comes
lunch
to
that day,
yeah, exactly. You basically like you have to like throw chicken bones in the air to be able to determine what kind of answer you're going to get. Her answers on First Nation sovereignty and Indigenous sovereignty, on reconciliation, she'll say that she wants reconciliation with First Nations communities, but then doesn't really have any solid policies behind how that's going to be accomplished. And where it comes to, for example, if building Canada, building a sustainable energy grid for Canada would encroach on Indigenous territory, she won't come out and just flat out say like, no, we're not going to do that. So it's just a very strange and conflicting set of principles. And at the very heart of it, they're equal capitalists for the most part. In their leadership race after Elizabeth May, in the previous election, when she ran, she failed to make a significant inroads. They have 2 seats in Parliament, which is great. But they won 3 total seats. 1 defected, and I'll explain that in a second. So they had 2 seats in Parliament. She, after many years being the leader of the Green Party, and after significant pressure to do so because she's been leading the Green Party for way too long, she resigned as the party leader, and there was a leadership race to replace her. The 2 leading candidates were Dimitri Lascaris, who's well known as an anti-imperialist, well known as an eco-socialist, somebody who has, I think, very upright politics, and Enemy Paul, who doesn't have any of that. Enemy Paul also happens to be a black woman. So, for for her, the symbolism of a black woman leading a Canadian federal party, I think, means a lot to some people. The problem is, during their leadership debates, when they were asked questions, especially around foreign policy, as to whether she believes that BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction, by pro-Palestinian activists, whether that should be illegal, or it counts as a hate crime. On the question of whether Venezuela's recognized president is Nicolas Maduro or Juan Guaido, she believes that the rightful leader of Venezuela is Juan Guaido. When she was asked about the coup in Bolivia, as to whether Canada should recognize Janine Áñez as the rightful leader of Bolivia, she actually refused to answer. She didn't give an answer on that at all. So on multiple items related to foreign policy, she pretty much toes the imperialist line. And where it comes to sustainable energy policy in Canada, what she proposes is to follow along with the Green New Deal plan, or a mirror image of the Green New Deal plan in the United States, which is basically equal capitalism. Dimitri Lascaris, on the other hand, is a staunch anti-Zionist, which got him labeled as an anti-Semite. He's not been afraid to criticize people that have just terrible politics in general, some of which are women, which got him labeled as a misogynist. And because he wasn't going to soft pedal his criticism of Enemy Paul, he was labeled as a racist. But the thing that I respected, he didn't back down from any of that, because he has political principles. He ended up losing to Enemy Paul in a fairly close race. And not long after Paul wins this election, she had to face a by-election in Toronto Centre, which is one of the Liberal strongholds in Canada. So Toronto Centre was the riding where that former Minister of Finance, Bill Morneau, that was his seat. Prior to Bill Morneau, Bob Rae, the interim leader of the Liberal Party, held that seat. So you understand, like, it's like one of the core ridings, for Liberal members in Ontario. Because the Green Party has a policy that people should live in the ridings where they run for member of parliament, and Enemy Paul, I guess, has a long-standing relationship in that community. She ran in Toronto Centre. Since Bill Morneau resigned, the person that was chosen to replace him, or at least was nominated to replace him, was a morning broadcaster who was one of the panelists on a show that's like the Canadian version of The View. It's called The Social. So Marcy Ian, and I should disclose, like, I actually know Marcy Ian, and I like her a lot. I think she's a very good person. We don't necessarily agree politically, but a good person. Marcy Ian resigned from her seat on The Social, again, that Canadian version of The View, to run for Bill Morneau's old seat. She won handily. Enemy Paul came in second place in that race. The problem there was that the Green Party demanded that the NDP, the Social Democrat Party, not run a candidate in that riding, so that Enemy would have the best chance at winning a seat. The NDP chose to run a candidate in that riding anyway, Brian Chang, who also has deep ties to that community, and I think has as much a right to run in that seat as anybody else. I guess the Green Party was upset because when Jagmeet Singh was running for a seat, even though he was party leader, he didn't have a seat in Parliament. So when he ran for his seat out in British Columbia, the Green Party chose to not run a candidate in that riding to give him the opportunity to win that seat. The NDP didn't reciprocate, so they were pissed off about that. Enemy Paul ended up coming in second. I would say partially for that reason. But when she ran this time around, it was also trailing a cloud of scandal, because her right-hand guy, who is also a staunch Zionist, was upset during the course of Israel bombing Gaza, killing civilians, bombing the Reuters building, and so on. Many Green Party members spoke out against that, of which one of them was Dimitri Lascaris, Enemy Paul's right-hand guy. Goes on a long Facebook tear, calling members of parliament even that were representative of the Green Party, calling them all anti-Semites, and basically alleging that his number one job was to scuttle them out of the party. This leads to Paul almost losing her leadership. and she was able to hang on to it after an internal review. She was not forced out of the leadership, but when she ran this time around, she came in fourth place, not second. So she came not only behind Marcy Ian, the first place Liberal candidate, but she came behind the NDP candidate Brian Chang, and she also came behind the Conservative candidate in fourth place. The Conservatives don't win votes in Toronto Centre, so it was pretty fucking embarrassing that she just got. I mean, after she came in second to Marcy Ian in the by-election, her announcement was that she's put the Liberals on notice. We're putting you on notice that no seats are safe. And the seat ended up being very safe because people hated her more this time around than last time around. So there's going to be a leadership review in 6 months, which is mandatory after the election. That the party has a leadership review within 6 months. And it seemed like in her concession speech that Annemiek Paul intends to hang on to her leadership of the party. She doesn't intend to resign. But in order to stay as leader of the Green Party, she requires 2/3 of the votes of the party members to keep that position. I don't think that she's going to get 2/3 votes, so it's very likely she's going to be ousted from the party.
Because everybody's racist, right? No.
Yeah, that's
yeah, exactly.
I just think it's so convenient that you have people like her. You have people like in the U.S. AOC pushing for a Green New Deal. And it's so convenient that they support all these coups in Latin America and other countries where there's like obviously incentives. I mean, for Canada especially, because these countries have lithium, right? They have rare earth minerals that are required to run the kind of equipment that is necessary for so-called clean energy, which is really kind of a fake term in my opinion. But I think that's a conversation for another episode of our podcast. But wow, I mean, it's just so it's exactly the same things that we've seen in the UK with Jeremy Corbyn and the anti-Semitism smear campaign against him. It's exactly the same dynamics that we see in the US. Really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I think also it's like even people who are opposed to it like don't want to touch it, like it's such a hassle to like get into like even defend someone against these kinds of allegations because then you're automatically kind of roped in as well. I personally have never voted for the Green Party in my life, and I was excited about Lascaris. Like I thought, okay, if he won, maybe I would support the party. But yeah, it was very disappointing to see him get defeated. But at the same time, I was like, why am I surprised? Like, why am I surprised that of course like the one anti-imperialist candidate gets defeated?
Yeah, it's like we have 6 parties of note in this country, and all of them are imperialist. Like all of them are pro-Zionist. Like it's like, so what exactly is the difference between any of them? Given that they're all sort of like, even the NDP, for example, which purports to be like the party, they never actually even say working class. Let me not give them too much credit. The party that's talking about taxing the quote unquote ultra rich and taxing billionaires and making these sort of like aesthetic gestures towards socialist politics don't actually have socialist politics. Like they're led by a labor aristocracy. Jagmeet Singh, for as much as he needles Justin Trudeau about having bought a pipeline with federal dollars, I don't think that he would ever stand in the way of any pipeline project being built in this country because he knows that NDP voters, if to the extent that NDP voters are out in the prairie provinces, many of them work in the oil patch. And Alberta is very likely going to elect an NDP government next time around because their current government, which is the United Conservative Party, have just fucked the dog.
Yeah, I've
absolutely
never
on the
seen
COVID
anything
response.
like it. Like if you
Oh,
think
What have they fucked? I didn't
on
catch
their
that.
COVID response.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah,
it was
they've just absolutely screwed the pooch.
insane. They defunded like hospitals and stuff. Like they defunded healthcare. They're very like austerity, pro austerity.
Austerity driven politics. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like the pandemic is not a time to be in I mean, it's never a time, but this is like the worst time to be, pushing austerity.
Austerity hawk. Yeah. And complaining about how little the federal government is doing, but you're sitting on literally billions of dollars that the federal government gave you to assist your province. As far as like whatever you need to spend money on, if it's building medical facilities, hiring on more first responders, if it's building shelters and so on. No, none of that money was spent. Same problem that we have here in Ontario, right? But it's very likely that they're going to end up electing an NDP government. That's where the polls are leaning. So Rachel Notley, the leader of the Albertan NDP, was very pro-pipeline. I mean, again, made gestures towards being an environmentalist, but was not only building pipelines, but building pipelines over and through sovereign Indigenous territory. John Horgan, the leader of the British Columbia NDPs, also violated Indigenous territory, not just for pipelines and natural gas lines, etc., but to, I think, build a fucking ski resort or some shit. Was that?
Yeah,
correct on
I
that
know
one?
what you're
Yeah.
talking about. I totally forgot the name now, but we were like talking about it in one of my constitutional law classes. Actually, it's pretty wild. I am admittedly not very well versed on environmental politics, but I definitely get like a sort of like AOC vibe from the NDP leadership right now, like not just because Jagmeet like played video games with her or whatever, but I'm waiting for him.
I can't get over that, man. That's too much. Like, that's just way too much.
I'm waiting for him to put on a tax the rich dress.
And the thing is, like, I think that anybody with an iota of like common sense, if not an ability to look into politics beyond the superficial, would know that when Jagmeet is talking about taxing billionaires in Canada, and this is how we're going to solve income inequality. Do you know how many billionaires there are in Canada?
Like five.
Fucking 47. There are 47 billionaires in Canada. So you think that
Big constituency.
We're going to close this gap on the backs of 47 people? Get the fuck out of my face with that shit. And so that's why they don't ever want to talk about class politics, because they know that if they talk about billionaires, it's going to get like, baby socialists rock hard for it. But there's no plan to close the income, the gaps in income inequality, because you are going to have to start taxing people that are making more than, say, $100,000 a year. Like, you are going to have to piss people off whose wealth is mostly tied up in their primary home. You are going to have to, go after inheritances. You are going to have to go after capital gains. You may have to restrict the amount of money that people can put into their tax-free savings accounts. Like, there's going to need to be a lot of belt tightening by people that might be part of your constituency. A lot of oil patch workers, a lot of steel workers are a lot of public sector workers are going to end up having to pay into the necessary tax base to close those gaps. But they never want to talk about that because they don't want to piss them off. So they just deflect all of that blame onto the billionaires, of which, like I said, there's only 47.
Right.
So I guess, like, for the sake of this argument, let's say the Green Party and the NDP are left of center, right? In the United States, we don't have any parties that are left of center. We have 2 parties. You guys have 6. So I guess my question is like, what is it like to have more than 2 parties and not and have even 2 parties that are left of center and still have like nothing to really show for it? I mean,
like shit.
Could the Green Party and the NDP form a coalition? Would that be effective? Is this a factionalism thing? Is this well, like, what? No. Well, I know, but I'm just trying to, like.
No. I mean, there have been talks of like coalition governments between like the Liberal and the NDP before. I don't think it would be like.
It'll never happen.
Yeah,
because the thing is, like, if you have left politics and you want to get anywhere in this country, you first have to get past the labor aristocracy, of which they are mostly wedded to the NDP. So the idea of a Green Party being wedded to them, well, the Green Party unfortunately threatens jobs in the oil patch, so that's never going to fucking happen. Right. If you are a communist, as I am, a member of the Communist Party of Canada, there's just no help. Like, you're not going to get any assistance or support from the unions because the unions are entirely wedded to extractive industries and to industries that depend on Canadian imperialism. So unfortunately, no. And as far as the Liberal Party goes, they can't help them. I think the last time that they got the union endorsement, I don't remember if it was 2015 or 2011. I can't forget which. I'm pretty sure it's 2011, and they end up screwing themselves. Anyway, I'll have to go and look that up. But anyway,
So is the NDP like a real force? Are they big? I mean, like, do they have more MPs than
generally
like there are members of the squad, for example?
Yes, but
I mean, I'm trying to get a picture of this.
They do, but the thing is like I think after Jack, so they were led by Jack Layton for a bit, and like he managed to get them in second place for one election. I don't really see that happening again anytime soon.
All Jack Layton did was remind middle-aged white women about their love for Patrick Stewart. That's pretty much it. Like, it was nothing going for him beyond aesthetics and a handsome smile. I think there was a lot of the votes for Jack Layton were votes for mustache rides. I don't understand what it was that people found so charismatic about the dude or so compelling about him. No, I'm being perfectly honest. I don't know what it was that people found so compelling about him, because he did not espouse left politics. People called him like an environmentalist and a leftist and so forth. But Jack Layton was for like the bombing of Syria. Jack Layton was a two-stater. There was nothing about his politics that spoke to anything remotely resembling socialist or leftist politics. What it was the same thing that Jagmeet Singh was able to do, which is make gestures towards left politics and sort of insinuate that he's for these positions. But, my hands are tied and we live in Canada. We'll get there eventually. And he also has the benefit, or let me phrase this in a more sensitive way than I was just about to. We don't know what Jack Layton's ultimate legacy is or would have been, because he passed away due to cancer. Now, Tom Mulcair, the previous leader of the NDP prior to Jagmeet Singh winning the leadership, finds it like humanly impossible to shut the fuck up when he's asked questions. And so he's continuously been undermining Singh and his own party whenever he finds himself in front of a news camera. I don't think that Jack Layton would have as deliberately undermined Singh if he was still around. But if people had to make an honest assessment of his politics now, I think it would have been like a Barack Obama. So imagine that Barack Obama had passed away in like 2013 or 14, right? Without having like lived out the legacy of his ultimately imperialist and destructive policies abroad. We have like a fair amount of hatred for the guy now. Like, I think back between like 2008 and 2012, people were just like gaga over the idea of a black president, and a black president that had what seemed to be left of center politics, but balanced that out with pragmatism and tried to get along with the right. If he'd have passed away in 2013, there would still be there would have been a hagiography about him. So I think that's kind of what has cemented Layton's legacy. But if you look at his actual record and what he supported, no, he was not a socialist and he was not on the left.
Yeah. I mean, I was very young when Layton was still a thing. So I actually wasn't really, I never really observed his politics that much. I lived in Tom Mulcair's riding, though, for a bit when he was the leader of the party. So I do know more about him. I was very unimpressed with him. I don't think I voted that year because I was just not interested in, being in
I love how open you are about your voting, Mila, because I don't know, I've never shared anything about my voting history. There is none.
You voted for Trump. I know. No kidding.
But I've always been scared to,
No.
But no, I voted with the popular vote, and I usually do, and the winner is always the couch,
Yeah.
But it's funny, you talking about Obama, and I'm just thinking shit, we give him shit about his imperialist policies, but what's done the most damage to his reputation that I can remember is this fucking party in Martha's Vineyard that he was holding, his birthday party. That that was like
with no masks,
the thing. Well, it wasn't even that. It wasn't even that. As far as I understand, it wasn't that people were maskless so much as there's this huge fucking gathering. Pearl Jam's gonna be there. All these famous people are gonna be there, and we're not supposed to go talk to our neighbor.
Yeah.
And so I think that was it for a lot of liberals because, I as much as like people have this idea of liberals that they're like, just content with staying in their home and watching The View and Rachel Maddow all day and never seeing anyone again. And a good part of that's true. I think that there are a lot of people who do vote Democrat because, abortion, other cultural issues that are like, maybe they support the lockdowns, but at least they have this idea in their head that like if we're being locked down, then so should the elites. So I actually think that kind of did more damage to Obama's reputation than like Syria or Ukraine or
It's
he really
like
go
I
ahead.
can excuse turning Libya into a failed state,
know, right?
but I draw the line at him having a party without me.
I know exactly, but no, I mean that's how I think. I think that's how it is. But there is hope for us. I guess Andrew Yang has announced he's starting a political party today.
Oh,
So
thank God.
cross your fingers, people.
One of my mutual followers on Twitter, when the news came out in early September, that
Oh, is this? I
Yang
thought
was
this
to
is a
start
new
his own
thing. I'm
party.
sorry.
Oh no, it was
I thought
announced
this
back
was
in
today.
September. Well, no.
Well.
Today was when the name was announced, but on September 9th, I think it was Politico that had reported the news that Yang was leaving the Democratic Party to go start his own. And a mutual follower of mine on Twitter said, I mean, this is like the most fucking just the corniest nigga in politics, right? And he said that, he's probably going to call it the Forward Party or some dumb shit. And
The
guess what it's
math party.
Is it called the Forward Party?
It's called the Forward Party. Yeah.
He called it almost a month in advance.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it's not the math party or like something really stupid like the common sense party,
I'm expecting
It
like
is
something
what it
like
is.
that to like come up, maybe like a Tulsi Gabbard party or something.
It's gonna be smaller than our people's party. Like I honestly think so. Like in our people's party is like not even a real thing. No offense.
I think Gabbard is ultimately going to end up. I don't think that she could go to the Republicans, to be honest. Like unless there's a lot of principles that she would have to abandon or completely reverse to join the Republicans. So I don't see her joining them. I would actually. She's more likely going to be a media personality than a long-standing member of Congress. Or
too
just
hot to be a politician. Like
I was a lot more sympathetic to her than probably I should have been. I mean, especially the past few days.
Yeah, the last few days.
You have to take what people are saying.
I got duped. I was like,
MCs.
I think part of it is like I thought she was hot, and so I was like a little bit mesmerized by that.
But she's also weird. Like I've talked to people that
I saw through her on day fucking one. I saw through her. I knew it immediately.
Like the serious stuff was such a big issue for me, and like to just see like one person not be a psycho on it. Like I think I was just so deprived of like, hearing good takes on Syria that her just like being a little bit skeptical was very refreshing for me.
And she
always had like self-contradictory positions.
Yeah.
On the one hand, she was saying that she doesn't believe in regime change, but she also believed that the U.S. should prosecute the war on terror. She believes that the southern border should be secured, but Trump shouldn't build a wall, but maybe he should like build part of a wall, but not the full wall. Like she's never been able to take a simple position and stick to it. It's always trying to play both sides. And I think because that blew up in her face, she's like, fuck it. I'll just, drop the entire act and go full fast now. So that's where she's at.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of sad.
Yeah. She's also like, I think that she's like weird. Like I've talked to people who have met her and just describe her as like kind of socially awkward. And then on top of that, she's like kind of part of a cult. Again, or people say she's kind of part of a cult. So, I mean, there's that, I don't think that she's going to be in like Congress, right? I don't think that she's going to run for president again. I think she kind of gets that she's not welcome in Washington. and I don't know what she's angling for now, but it's it's
I
weird
don't know
because
if
like
Marjorie
well,
Taylor
like
Greene
people
can
would say,
still
"Oh,
be in
she's
Washington.
Islamophobe," right? People would say, "Oh, she's an Islamophobe," and then I'd like go on her Twitter and like look for like key terms. I'd go
She
on
is though. She is.
but
She is an Islamophobe.
she is, and she's shown
Yeah.
that in the past few days. But like, I've gone to her statements, her press releases and stuff, and she's said stuff that has like explicitly contradicted that. So when people were saying all
But
these
I've
things
said
about her,
like
I pushed back.
she holds a lot of
Yeah,
positions that are
yeah,
self-contradictory, and that's just one of them, right?
Mhm.
So she'll say, for example, that like it's Islamists in, and it's funny how she'll do this, right? She'll say it's Islamists in Saudi Arabia and Turkey, and then she'll say, oh, in Pakistan, as if
yeah,
as if that's not what she was trying to lead with in the first place, because
right.
you see that she belongs to part of a cult, and I mean, she does. It was her parents that got her into it. Like she was kind of born into this weird, like, I don't know exactly how to call it. It's like I can't exactly call it Hindutva because it's like it's Hindutva friendly,
Yeah,
but she does share this like animosity towards Pakistan and Pakistani people, which she
yeah.
tries really hard to throw a tarp over it, but it's like she can just never hide her contempt. So she'll try to say that she's talking about quote unquote Islamists and not Islam, but
Yeah.
it's like saying like I'm not talking about Jewish people. I'm talking about like super Jews or some shit. Like it's like you're
Right.
not fooling anybody.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like also you have to be a little bit more careful when you talk about Palestine because there is like institutional Islamism, right? Whatever that is. But at the same time, like the prime minister is a former cricket player. Like I've heard stories about him, like hooking up with young girls while on coke at like crazy parties. So
Yeah, sounds
he's very
pretty
secular.
Islamist. Yeah.
He's very secular, but right, exactly.
I
So
mean,
you have to be a little bit more nuanced than that if you're going to talk about Pakistan like that.
yeah, and I mean, I think, on one hand, like when you're talking about something like Syria, it is important to, acknowledge that there is a extremism problem. And that's kind of what I thought she was doing at first because she wanted to like stop arming the rebels in Syria. So I was like, okay, cool. Like I'm
She was
on
the only
board
one who
with that.
talked about the dirty war. And
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders, I didn't support him 2016. The second time he ran, in the early stages I actually wrote an article that was very critical of his foreign policy, and then I stopped criticizing him because I thought, okay, maybe he's got a chance. It would at least be better than what we got. But his foreign policy was fucking awful, and Tulsi Gabbard was like the only one that wasn't saying stuff that was like it seemingly prepared for them by the Council on Foreign Relations. Um, so I definitely defended her, and I do have some regret about that. But at the same time, like I'd still take her over Joe Biden. I'm sorry.
I mean, that's a low bar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I definitely feel duped. I guess Andre was not a sucker like the two of us. So it's funny. I've never really felt that way with Canadian politicians, but I did read Jagmeet's biography, his autobiography, and I actually did find it kind of touching. And then I was like, snap out of it. Like,
No, the thing is, like, he's a good dude. Okay, the first time that I met Jagmeet Singh was in 2000, I think 2011, and that was
mhm.
when he was first running for, or he wanted to run for a seat in Malton, or Bramley Gore Malton, which is where my grandmother lives. So I met him at Carabana, which is like Toronto sort of like carnival, like the Brazilian carnival, right?
Mhm.
Um, we have an event like that called Carabana. It's like a celebration of Caribbean culture, etc. So this is like way before my political days. But I had like volunteered on people's campaigns before and things like that. I was always happy to go, door knocking with folks. So when I'm walking to Carabana with my partner and a friend at the time, and I see this guy handing out like T-shirts saying "Jagmeet for Bramley Gore Malton," and he hands me a T-shirt and he's like, "Hey, would you like to help out with your campaign?" And I was like, "Oh, I see that you're running like in the area where I grew up, like right next door." We talked for a few minutes, and he asked if I was able to help him out with his campaign, if I was able to volunteer. And I said that unfortunately I live in downtown Toronto and I work right nearby, so it's hard for me to get out that way. But I wish you the best of luck. Well, he ends up winning that seat, and he represented Bramley Gore Malted for a number of years. He ended up becoming the deputy leader of the Ontario NDP. So it was speculated for a very long time that he was going to end up replacing Andrea Horvath, who was the leader of the NDP in Ontario. And Andrea Horvath had on two occasions, no, sorry, only on one occasion, but almost on one occasion, and then on one occasion had won the loyal opposition. So she was basically like the leader of the opposition in the Ontario legislature. So people were thinking that after she ends up retiring or resigning as leader, that Jagmeet Singh was going to end up winning. But in the wake of Tom Mulcair, the leader of the federal NDP, resigning his leadership, then Singh sort of leapfrogged past that to end up winning the leadership of the federal NDP. A lot of the press around him was super positive. I think for very good reasons. Like he has good politics. Like let me not be unfair to him. Even though he is a social democrat, and even though at a federal level, he's very wishy-washy on policies, so that he'll indicate, for example, that he supports self-determination in Venezuela. He'll tweet about the Bolivian coup. Are they going to? Is he going to introduce any sort of private members bill, for example, castigating the Trudeau government for supporting a coup or for supporting the ouster of Nicolas Maduro? He won't. He'll tweet about it. But when he was with the Ontario NDP, these aren't like the matter of foreign policy is outside of his bailiwick. So it's mostly dealing with things like, healthcare and police brutality, income inequality, employment, and that sort of thing. And his politics as an Ontario member of provincial parliament were very good. So, let me not take too much away from him here. And his autobiography was indeed very touching. I think it's the most like public vulnerability that I think I've ever seen from like a Punjabi member of the Canadian public. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before. So I do want to give credit where credit's due. I think he has very good reasons for people to like him. I just completely disagree with much of his politics as it pertains to a federal level.
Yeah. Like what are his shortcomings, and also why was his autobiography touching to like the both of you?
You go ahead, Mila.
So I found a lot of the federal campaigning to be a little bit superficial. Kind of what Andre said about him, like he'll send a tweet about stuff, but like will he really, take a stand on things? I think the NDP in general is a little bit cowardly when it comes to foreign policy. Like I think that's what the word I would use to kind of describe it. There was there was another incident with Nikki Ashton that involved like kind of condemning her involvement with the Free Meng thing, or like condemning her involvement with like some sort of like, again, like no Cold War with China sort of ordeal. I find that like a lot of the aesthetic is very similar to AOC, which I find is very like off-putting to a lot of people. But there are some policies that I thought, could be good that the NDP were endorsing. They wanted universal pharmacare, which I think is really important, and universal dental, because contrary to what a lot of our other countries, like our friends down south, believe, we don't really have full for like healthcare.
Yeah.
We still don't have coverage for pharmacare for a lot of mental health issues and for dental. So I really did think that those were good issues to bring to light. But yeah, I did think that the foreign policy stuff was I think he does try to play both sides on that, especially when it comes to Palestine. But then again, I was like, should I wasn't expecting more. Like I wasn't like,
Right.
oh, okay, maybe the NDP is going to have a principled stance on this. Like I wasn't.
So this sounds like DSA if it had power.
Yeah,
right?
it's
Yes.
very
It's
similar.
run of the mill social democrat stuff.
Mhm,
And so
exactly.
why was his autobiography so touching to like the
I
both
mean,
of you?
I think
Because you
his
both kind of said
life.
that.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
sound like Trump now. Like she had an incredible life. But I think his story is moving. Like he had a very difficult upbringing. He was very candid about, experiencing things like sexual assault growing up,
Oh,
and
really?
yeah, and like his
I mean,
dad
that's impressive for a man, for a male politician
to come forward about.
admit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like it's hard. I like, especially like, because I've talked to a lot of men who have like told me like, it's very hard to like be open about that. So like I really respected that he was like able to, you know, be candid about that. And he also talked about like his dad being an alcoholic and how he had to like kind of look after his brother. And like it's clear from the book, if I take it at its word, that he does care about like issues and justice.
Social injustice. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he really knows what like economic precarity looks like in some respect, because his dad wasn't able to work because of his alcoholism. And he ended up having to like look after his brother.
Who is now,
So
by the way, not only
yeah,
not
now
only a
he's
lawyer just like he was, but he's also a member of provincial parliament. So his brother,
yeah,
Oh,
yeah, his brother
yeah.
has a seat just around so he and his brother had like neighboring seats.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, there is something to me that's very respectable and commendable, like about looking after your family and being there for your family. Um, and clearly he really cared about his family, including his dad, even though his dad was like abusive and like alcoholic and whatever. And so like I did find like I read the book and I was like, okay, has a lot of admirable and respectable and resilient qualities. Like I'm sure he's like not a bad person. Um, but yeah, the foreign policy stuff I found a little bit cowardly. Maybe his hands were tied. I don't know. But another thing that I have issue with is this, like a lot of the tax the rich branding under this current economic system doesn't really mean much,
yeah.
because it's like, what are you going to pay for with the tax? Like especially, I mean, this is a big issue in the US particularly, because it's like, okay, yeah, we're going to tax the rich and then we're going to pay for the Iron Dome, like, or you're going to pay for
Yeah.
like defense spending. So it's like, if you're still going to have the kind of governments that we have, like what are we going to pay for to go mow down like indigenous land or whatever? Like you can't just say we need to tax people without, changing what the role of the government is in the
Right.
economy. And so that's another kind of issue I have with like the social democratic messaging, is I'm kind of like, okay, again, tax the rich for what? Like, yeah, you want to provide dental, you want to provide pharmacare, great, I support that. But what are you going to do about the things that the government spends money on right now that's
Right.
not good, that it should not be spending money on? That to me is kind of a problem. And I also think the Conservative Party this year actually did a better job of highlighting some economic issues, which is like sad to me.
Yeah.
But like, like they were talking about housing speculation. They were talking about, like foreign buyers and stuff like that. Like,
Corruption in government, and they were talking about like environmental policy and shit. It was wild. It was
mhm.
it was the most progressive conservative type of. And when I say progressive conservative, what I mean is that the Conservative Party of Canada is the result of a merger between that Reform
Yeah.
Party, as I mentioned earlier, the Western-based, like far, not far right, but like farther right party, and the Progressive Conservatives were the long-standing sort of you know like dominant the mode of conservatism in this country.
Yeah.
But the PCs, for people, I guess, kind of assume because like conservatives in their name that they have like regressive policies, and in Canada they don't. The PCs actually have I think, a fairly decent record of supporting human rights. Brian Mulroney, for example, the former leader
Well,
of
that's
the
not a great thing, but
oh yeah.
no, whenever
Well,
I hear
he was
human rights, like I have like sirens go off in my head, you know.
no, Brian Mulroney,
Yeah.
Irish Canadian Prime Minister, was Prime Minister at the same time as Ronald Reagan, and they used to get together and sing Irish songs. But he was a
Spoke at
supporter
my
of Nelson
grad.
Mandela.
Yeah. He spoke at my McGill grad, like at my convocation, and he was like old and,
Yeah.
not really with it. The font on his paper was so big. Anyway.
Well, he's super old now, but he was a supporter. He was against apartheid in South Africa.
Okay.
Mhm.
You
So
know, he was
actual human rights, yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, he
real
supported
ones,
freeing
not
Nelson
like the
Mandela.
op human. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like the PC Party of Ontario, under Leslie Frost, were the ones who uh, drafted the first, like, they codified civil rights in Ontario, and legislated that people of any color or background would be served in public establishments. This was after a demonstration in Dresden, Ontario, where black activists went to a diner that was shutting out black patrons, including a local who had served in World War II. They went to this diner, they sat in, the owner threatened to throw them out. And after that incident made the news, the PC government of Ontario drafted human rights legislation to make sure that that wouldn't happen. So, like, I don't want to take anything away from conservatives in this country. They have supported human rights and have had progressive policies, but during the Stephen Harper era, which is the previous conservative government, they were known for just taking the most like backwards, austere,
Yeah.
regressive policies
Mhm.
possible. They were, I mean, verging on like ethnocentrism and showing favoritism towards ethnic groups. For example, when people were leaving Syria, Egypt, etc., during the quote unquote Arab Spring, they were showing preference to, for example, like Coptic Egyptians who were
Yeah.
Christians and,
Yeah.
and Syrian Christians, etc. Right. So they set up they wanted to set up a hotline to report quote unquote barbaric cultural practices. So if you had a suspicion that your neighbor was practicing female genital mutilation, you'd call this hotline, and basically like they were going to make illegal practices more illegal or something like that by snitching on your neighbors, right? So it did kind of tarnish their reputation, because the Reform Party, their leader at the time that they merged with the Progressive Conservatives, was Stephen Harper. So he
Mhm.
essentially absorbed the Progressive Conservative Party. Many of the former PC members who said, like, they warned uh, prior to the merger that merging with the, at that time they were called the Canadian Alliance. So they went from Reform to Canadian Alliance, to merging with the PC Party. And a lot of the PC stalwarts said that if this goes through, it's going to ruin conservative politics in Canada, which it did. And I think that
Kinda
Aaron
did, yeah.
O'Toole, yeah, Aaron O'Toole, the leader of the Conservative Party going into this election, had policies that were heavily reminiscent of the former PC Party of Canada.
Yeah, and I was kind of pleasantly surprised. I really, really want people to deal with this housing crisis. I think for me, probably because I live in Vancouver too, but like for me, it's like
Okay,
my
but don't you start falling into that foreign buyer bullshit too, because 95% of the housing market is owned by residents. It's less than 5% of units that are owned by
And the foreign
non-resident
buyers are all
buyers.
like luxury stuff that like you'd have to have like really intense overhaul of housing policy for that to be affordable and make like a real difference for like the average
no, for
person who's
sure.
housing insecure.
But
You
I'll
know?
give you an example. Like, in Vancouver, there are people, like, first of all, a lot of people do argue that it's like racist because some of the foreign buyers are from China, but like, there's like a lot of white South Africans that own houses in Vancouver as well, and they don't
Yeah.
live here. And like, I don't know. I think if you own, like, you should live in a house if you own it. That is all. So
True.
that's
What I'll say though is that none of the parties, not the New Democrats, not the CPC Conservative Party, not the People's Party, not the Liberals, nobody, we're willing to address what actually causes the housing crisis. So,
Right, of
I mean,
course.
it's
Yeah.
a few things. So, the People's Party approach to it was that they were going to reduce immigration because with immigrants
Yeah.
coming into this country, because roughly 300,000 odd immigrants come into Canada on a yearly basis, or are granted residency. Canada does not replace its own population, so the birth rate and the labor force of Canada is not sustainable just by people who were born here. We actually do require immigration to continue to grow our labor force. The second is that the amount of housing that's available isn't an issue because our largest,
Mhm.
like as a percentage of GDP, real estate is Canada's single largest industry, and the
Wow,
majority of
I didn't
that
realize that.
is yeah, the majority of it is bound up in residential real estate.
Yeah.
So the problem is that it's not, how many immigrants move here. It's not how many foreign home buyers own housing units. It's this insane idea that somebody who wants to rent a home, apartments or a house or whatever, somebody who's looking for a roof over their heads, should be competing with somebody who wants to buy a home and own it and live there for the rest of their lives or whatever because they want to have a home for their family. Like my situation, right? Like I
Yeah.
don't have rental properties. We have a home that we raise our family in. I should be
I'm
competing in the
jealous.
same market.
I was gonna say,
Teach me to
"Aw,
be
that's
like
so
you.
cute." Yeah.
No, it's funny,
Because yeah.
I've been so left my whole life, and then I get older and older. I'm like, damn, I want property. Like,
Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, wanting to be
yeah,
able to own your own home is not. There's nothing fucking wrong with that. It's put out of our reach because we think that only rich people are. I mean, frankly, it is for the most part rich people or people that have had help from family that can afford to
yeah,
buy homes. But this used to be a thing where anybody who was working for a living was able to accomplish, or at least if you were white, you'd be able to accomplish it. But
yeah,
that's a whole
yeah,
other kettle of fish. And so the renters who are looking for a home over their heads and the people who are looking to buy a home to raise their families in are also competing with the house flippers, the people that want to buy real estate investment properties, and they might be small landlords. They might own like 1 to 3 properties, or they might only have one property, but they buy in it, they live in it, they don't plan on being there for longer than the mortgage term, 5 years. When that mortgage term is up and they've been able to sink some money into renovations, etc., then they sell it and then move on to another property. And they're also competing with the larger landlords that have multiple properties, anywhere between like 5 and 10 and 15 properties. And they're also competing with the companies like BlackRock that have like
yeah,
thousands and thousands of properties. So all of these groups are competing for space in the same fucking market. That is what's and
Yeah.
when you add on to the fact that we artificially keep our inflation low, which also keeps our key interest rates low. Given that we also have a Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation that backstops mortgages that have less than a 20% down payment, meaning that with as little as like 5%, you can own a home. Granted, you are going to be paying a lot of mortgage interest on top of that. But the idea was, especially in the early to mid 2000s, that you should just be able to like leverage your way into a home. So we have these insane practices. We don't build social housing. We have this gigantic housing backlog in all of our major metropoles. I think the Toronto housing backlog is something to the effect of like $40 billion, right? We don't build more social housing. Normally you'd be able, or normally in the past, the Canadian government had been able to borrow from the Bank of Canada at low to 0% interest to fund the building of social housing and social infrastructure. We don't do that. Right now, it all comes out in the form of T-bills and bank loans. So we don't take out debt for anything other than, say, defense contracts and
yeah.
subsidizing
The important
multi-billion
stuff.
dollar, yeah, multinational corporations. That's the problem with our housing market. It's not necessarily foreign buyers, although I'm not going to say it's not a problem at all. But the way that we do housing is a problem, and none of the major parties had addressed that. So
Yeah.
it is fucking depressing.
No, that's true, and, like, I think that was one of the more disappointing things to me this election. Um, I mean, I rent, so that's probably why. It's probably personal, but I do think it's an issue here, and it's like you said, it's not properly addressed. Um, I forgot what else I was gonna say. Yeah, that's,
But I think we were talking
Well-
about like our disappointment with the NDP
Oh,
the
yeah.
NDP platform. Yeah.
So we are at an hour and a half. Do you guys want to keep going? Like I said, I don't know anything about this stuff, so it's really on you two. You got time, Andre?
I'm cool. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to touch on, though.
I mean,
Yeah.
we hit the lockdowns. Well, let's end it then. You know what? I'm kind of tired, anyways. But thanks for joining us on this episode. We actually have a little bit of an announcement to make. Tomorrow, we're doing back-to-back episodes. We're gonna have Ben Norton on.
We got another one.
Talk about
Hey.
some political shakeups in Latin America that happened actually last week in Mexico City, where I'm based. You actually had leaders from all over Latin America come here at the invitation of the president and talk about, well, some of them talked about replacing the Organization for American States, which is like a U.S. puppet international body in the region that has a lot of sway and influence. So we're going to have Ben Norton on tomorrow night to talk about that. Thank you for joining us again. Please follow Andre. He's, I've been following him for a long time on Twitter, and I've been reading his writings, and he's just like one of the sharpest people out there. So keep an eye on his Twitter account. It's at Andre Domise. Am I pronouncing that right?
But it's okay.
Domise. All right. Well, it's got an E at the end. Thanks for joining us again. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.